Hello everyone and welcome to English with Tom. Today I want to answer a question I get asked all the time. Why do you live in Russia? It's not exactly the country most people expect someone from England to choose. It's far away, it's cold, and there are a lot of stereotypes about the people. So whenever I tell someone back home that I live in Russia, the reaction is usually, well, surprise. Now, of course, I'm not the only foreigner here. There's a small expat community in Russia, and quite a few of them are British. Some come for work, some are just fascinated by Russian culture, and yes, some come because they fall in love with Russian women. But my story is a little bit different. My connection to Russia actually started when I was a child. Long before I even moved here, I had visited several times, and those early experiences stayed with me. So in this video, I'm going to share how my interest in Russia began and how it eventually led to the life I'm living here today. Before I start the story, just a quick reminder, you can download the full transcript for this episode. I really recommend reading along while you watch. It helps you understand the story much more clearly. You'll also find a list of key vocabulary with translations, plus a quiz to test your understanding. And of course, if you enjoy the video, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. Okay, so back to the story. When I was a teenager, my impression of Russia was that it was an exciting place, almost dangerous in some way. In my mind, it was a land of snow, spies, and beautiful women. And like a lot of people, I'd grown up watching films where the villains were often Russian. That made the country feel somewhat mysterious and even a little frightening. But as a teenage boy, I actually found that idea incredibly exciting. There was also this belief that if you moved to Russia, you could become rich. I remember being about 13 years old when Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea Football Club in London. That was the first time I'd even heard the word oligarch, and the first time I really realised that Russia had enormous natural resources and extremely wealthy people. Of course, I knew Russia was a huge country and that Moscow was the capital. But beyond that, as a child, I didn't really know much about it at all. When I was 12 years old, I started secondary school in England. It was a traditional grammar school, which meant I had to pass an entrance exam to get in. When we arrived, we had to choose 2 foreign languages from a list of 6. There was French, German, Spanish, Latin, Chinese, and Russian. Now, for England, that was actually quite unusual because most schools don't offer so many language options. So I felt incredibly lucky. In general, I would say people in the UK don't always have the best attitude towards learning foreign languages. Many believe it simply isn't necessary due to the fact that English is spoken almost everywhere around the world. For example, when British people go on holiday to Spain, they often don't speak Spanish. They expect people to speak English there to them instead. Now, personally, I think that's a lazy attitude. Learning languages is good for your brain, and more importantly, it really opens the door to completely new cultures. But anyway, back to my school story. To help us choose, the school gave us trial lessons in each language. And I still clearly remember walking into the Russian classroom for the first time. I was immediately fascinated. The sounds of the language were completely unfamiliar. There were old Soviet posters on the walls, and the teacher was incredibly warm and friendly. In fact, I think that was the very first time I'd ever met a real Russian person in real life. At the beginning, we spent a long time learning the alphabet. Russian felt especially difficult because some letters look exactly like English letters and in fact sound completely different. That was very confusing at first, I remember. We didn't study Russian very intensively, maybe once or twice a week, but slowly we began reading simple texts and speaking in short sentences. And honestly, I loved it. The idea that I could actually communicate in another language felt amazing. It was completely different from any other subject that we studied at school. Okay, so 2 years later, in 2005, our Russian teacher told us about a special school trip to St. Petersburg in winter. We would spend a week living with Russian host families, and the idea was simple: to speak Russian every day to improve our language skills. And during the day, we would also get to explore the city and visit its most famous sites. Now, at first, I didn't want to go at all. The trip was during the school holidays, and being a lazy teenager, I would much rather have stayed at home and watched TV. But my mum found the letter about the trip and convinced me to go. She told me that it was a rare opportunity to visit a completely new country. Once I agreed, we were given a very long packing list, I remember. Because it was winter, we needed seriously warm clothing, a heavy coat, hat, scarves, thick gloves, and lots of layers. Now in England, winter temperatures rarely fall below 5 degrees, above zero that is. So I had absolutely no idea what real cold felt like. I honestly thought that a pair of warm trainers would be enough. They were not. Along with the packing list, we were also given a list of rules, and I remember some were quite surprising. For example, we were told not to take photos in metro stations, but one rule in particular stood out. Don't lick any frozen objects outside. Apparently, the year before, a student had managed to stick his tongue to a frozen park bench. Finally, the day of the trip arrived, and we flew to St. Petersburg and went straight to a local school which helped to organise the exchange trip. The host families were already there waiting for us. I discovered I would be staying with a girl called Katya and her parents, and the moment Katya started speaking to me in Russian, I panicked. Real Russian speech sounded totally different from the slow classroom recordings we were used to. At that moment, I realised communication was going to be very difficult. When we arrived at the apartment, her parents welcomed me warmly and immediately gave me a pair of slippers, something I found a little bit unusual at the time. Then they sat me down at a table covered with dishes I'd never seen before. There was Olivier salad, sandwiches with caviar, and something a bit strange called holodets, a kind of meat jelly that looked very mysterious to me. After dinner, I showed them photographs from England, my house, my family, my friends, and finally a picture of Liverpool. The moment they saw this photograph in particular, the whole family shouted together, "The Beatles," and from that moment the atmosphere was completely relaxed. The week turned out to be incredible. We travelled around the city, visited churches, the Hermitage, St. Isaac's Cathedral, but what really impressed me the most was the architecture, the beautiful buildings everywhere which lined the snowy Neva River. Even today, St. Petersburg remains the most beautiful city I've ever seen, especially in winter. The atmosphere there feels truly magical. Okay, so now let's fast forward 15 years to 2020. And I made one of the biggest decisions of my life. I moved to Moscow. At the time, I was working as an English teacher at a school in England, but I felt ready for a change. I wanted something new, and I was particularly interested in working at an international school. These schools often offer better conditions for teachers, such as higher salaries, longer holidays, and smaller class sizes, which are much easier to teach. But honestly, it wasn't just about work. I'd started to feel a little bit bored in England. And I wanted the challenge of living abroad and experiencing a completely different culture. So I began searching online for international teaching jobs. There were opportunities everywhere: China, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia. Now I thought China felt a little bit far away, And at that time, I wasn't sure what life there would be like. Now, since then, I have met many teachers who have worked there, especially in Shanghai, and they speak very highly of the city and the country. I hope one day I'll have the opportunity to visit. In the end, I received 2 job offers, one from a school in Moscow and another from a school in Dubai, and thankfully I chose Moscow. Over the past 5 years, that decision has completely changed my life. I've met incredible people and traveled across Russia, from Murmansk in the far north to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast. And even today, I continue to enjoy living here in Moscow. Now guys, if you've made it to the end of the video, congratulations, that's a real achievement. Listening to a full story in English can be challenging, so give yourself a lot of credit. You're making real progress. In future videos, I'll be sharing more stories about life in Russia while helping you improve your English naturally.